Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the Chiltern Teaching School Hub RQT webinar. My name is Katy Norsworthy and today I will be sharing with you some ideas to keep marking effective, informative and hopefully, more importantly, manageable for you as teachers. The session is hopefully to make your life a little easier. Everything is just my opinion, some of the things I've seen, some of the things I've used myself. So hopefully we'll be able to make it useful, personal, and not take all day over it, which is the main point of this. And without further ado, I'm going to get started. So as I said earlier, my name is Katy Norsworthy. I have been teaching for 17 years. I'm currently an SLE working as an appropriate body coordinator. I have been a head of PE and dance. I was a head of the faculty for 10 years. And I've also, over the years, over my career, I've been in a fortunate position where I've been able to teach other subjects as well. So I was a teaching and learning practitioner for maths, and I've also taught some English and science. So I hope it gives me a well-rounded perspective when it comes to assessment, marking and feedback, because I've got some experience behind me there. So the aim of the session today is to consider the importance of assessment, marking and feedback. I hope to assess the importance of setting the criteria. I hope to share a variety of time-saving assessment, marking and feedback techniques. I'm going to start talking about criteria. Criteria is where you start. What is it that you want the students to learn? What do you want the students to do? If you don't have the criteria, I don't know how you really know this. So I don't know if any of you have ever done the Draw a House activity, the CPD session. This really got me thinking about the importance of criteria. So firstly, we were asked as a staff body to draw a house without any criteria. And so the first thing I did was look to the teacher next to me and see what they were drawing, because I found it quite an open-ended task. And I wasn't sure where to start. Was my neighbour going to draw a garage? Were they going to have curtains on the windows? And I had a look, and that's how most teachers reacted, really. We had a look around and then started. And obviously, at the end of the task, I think we were given 5 minutes. At the end of the task, we had a variety of different houses, big houses, small houses, houses with windows, houses with cats in the window, flowers, an array of things. And if you're setting a task within a lesson where you want an array of different ideas, you want an open-ended task, fantastic. But when it came to the second activity, where we were asked to draw a house and we were given some criteria, I felt much more in my comfort zone. And we were given 5 minutes, and rather than look around the room or look at the teacher next to me to see where they were starting, I straight away had a look, where can I get the most marks? And I think it was for making sure that I had a chimney and some windows. I had 5 points per window. And it just gave me some kind of structure, and I knew where I was and I knew how to start. And that was obviously the point of the whole exercise. It was to emphasise the importance of criteria. And that's where I think we need to start with any kind of assessment, any time of marking or feedback. If we can get the criteria, if everyone knows what they're trying to learn or what they're trying to do and what the success criteria is going to be, then it's easier for the teacher and it's easier for the students. So from the student perspective, if students have sight of the criteria in advance, they will be able to see clearly how their work will be judged, and they'll be able to plan their preparation, take control of their learning. So in that task, I felt like I had control of my learning once I'd been given a set criteria and I had guidance and I knew where to start. I put pen to paper straight away. Students will be able to understand the marks they've been given. And we know students, they don't like the grey areas, they like it black and white, they like to know what is it they are required to do. A student should be able to look at the mark given to them alongside clear marking criteria and understand how they achieve their mark. And it's quite easy to say you didn't do X, Y, and Z if it's written there in front of you and they can easily see, oh, yes, I did. And it doesn't have to be marks. It can just be guidance. But if it's there in black and white, everybody's on the same page. Good marking criteria and clear assessment can be a part of feedback. Detailed marking criteria can offer an initial narrative and framework for feedback. from the staff perspective, to ensure that it ensures that marking is reliable. Good marking criteria should ensure that different markers can assign consistent grades. So quite often a task might be done with a whole year group taught by different teachers, and it means everybody's on the same page, everything's consistent, every classwork can be compared, it's not just in one class. The importance of assessment marking criteria ensures assessors are measuring what the assessment is intended to measure. You can align marking criteria to module and programme learning outcomes. I think those of you in secondary, when you get to Key Stage 4 or Year 9 onwards, we quite often give students past papers, or we give them assignments to look at for a piece of coursework, the expectations. We do that a lot at Key Stage 4. Do we do that enough at Key Stage 3? Do we let the students see what that end goal is? What does it look like? Have we put the steps in place for them to be able to get the marks, to get the grades, and to learn what we want them to learn? And good marking criteria can act as a part of feedback, which makes feedback production more efficient and less labour intensive. So there's some of the theory behind the criteria. Some of these are just, there's lots and lots of different ways to mark and feedback. Obviously today I'm just going to share some of the techniques that I've seen, or I've read about, or I've used myself, and that I think are really effective, efficient, and also benefit the students. The first one is the gallery critique. So this is a form of peer assessment. We all know that peer assessment can be fraught with problems. However well you train a class to do it proficiently, each student is at the mercy of the accuracy and commitment of the pupil next to them. And it can have positives and negatives, but quite often, if we're using the same, you're getting the feedback from the same person, whether they're good at giving feedback or not, depending on the seating plan. The gallery critique draws on ideas from Ron Berger's book, An Ethic of Excellence, and involves students moving around the classroom, critiquing one another's work using Berger's kind, specific, and helpful mantra, along with a plentiful supply of post-it notes. Not only do students receive detailed feedback from a number of peers, they also learn from reading each other's work. So the gallery critique, it is lots of post-its. So each student has completed their task, whether it's an extended piece of writing, whether it's something practical they've made, or a piece of artwork. They all finish. Each student's got a host of post-it notes. We allow the students to get out of their seats and off they go. They are going to be marking the work. But we give them some kind of framework. So I'm just going to flick forward. This is what Ron Berger is talking about. We give them some kind of framework to be able to do the marking. We all know that peer assessment can end up with some people getting some really reliable, constructive feedback, and other students just getting, I really liked the use of colour. It's not very specific and not very helpful. So you can give them some kind of guide to go around. They could have this as a little sheet of paper, or they could have it on the board for when they're going round. So they go round with their post-its out of their seats, and they've got the criteria for how to mark or feedback or assess that piece of work. When I've done it before, I've set a time limit because when they've done this for the first time, they might not spend long enough, and you want them to really have a look at the piece of work. So I might give them 30 seconds to move chairs to go to a different piece of work, and then give them 3 minutes at that piece of work to go through the kinds, to have a first minute to read through it, or to have a look at the detail, and then give maybe one kind comment, one specific comment, one helpful. Or it might be that you just focus on one of those, or 2 kind ones, whatever you want to do. And then up they get, and they've got 30 seconds to move to a different seat, and then they do again. And then obviously as a learner, you go back to your seat at the end of this activity, and you've got loads of post-it notes. So you've got various feedback from various different people that's hopefully kind, specific, helpful, and can be constructive moving forward. And it's important, obviously, to allow the learners some time for reflection. They can read all those comments. You might make it more formal, and they have to write underneath the piece of works what the best kind comment that they like, the best specific, the best helpful. And the more you do this, if you add this to a routine, then you might not need to put kind, specific, and helpful on the board. They might, or it could be on a display. but they get into the routine, they know what they're doing, they know what's expected, and it's just so much feedback from a learner. It's more than they get from just a teacher having a look. So there's one form of peer assessment that I think works really, really well. Moving away from peer assessment, I don't know if anyone has used some whole class feedback sheets before. So again, you've got everybody's work to look at, and rather than writing the same thing, because quite often we look at books, we'll read 5 or 6 and we can spot the common misconceptions. They repeat themselves, they're all doing that one thing, and you think to yourself, oh God, I should have taught that better, or I'm going to do that differently next time. But rather than writing the same thing down, you can have one sheet of paper. I don't fill this in as I go. I have all the work, and as I read through it, I have my little bit of paper and I write down the things that are coming up. I write down the things that are going really, really well. If I find something I really like, a piece of work from a student, I keep that to the side, because they're in, they could be on the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame can be whatever you want. So it might be on for the effort. It might be that student's really improved and you can see they've worked really hard on this piece of work. But I tend to stick to 3 what went wells, a couple of misconceptions. I've got common spag areas, so that's obviously spelling and grammar. For this one, we were looking at the digestive system, and they were doing some kind of posters and labelling activity, and lots of them were able to label the structures. That was the easiest part of the whole task. Common misconceptions: have you used the word churn when talking about the role of the stomach? So, most of them didn't. So I write this, we print it out. The fix it is what are we going to do about it? So the start of next lesson, once I've done the marking, I give out these sheets. I've only written one of these whole class feedback sheets. I print it out for everybody in the class. They all have to stick it in, and then we fix it. That's the important part, that they have a look. Did I do one of the common misconceptions? What did I do? Miss has said that the posters are loaded with key vocabulary. Did I have lots of key vocabulary on mine? And the fix it, I will give a good 10 minutes to the fix it initially, because they will get used to it and they will know how to do this quicker. I will have this whole class feedback sheet on a slide on the board as well, to emphasize that we're all looking at this, and then they go through. So the fix it, ensure all letters are labelled. So they have to label parts of the digestive system using A, B, C, D. So they have to go through and check that, add any missing explanations, and they go through and they can work with their table, or they can work with the person next to them, and they make sure that all the fix-its are done. And then, how were you respectful, ready or resilient in this task? So that was just something that the school were focusing on at that moment. So it was added to the whole class feedback sheet. It's totally up to you. You might already have a whole school one of these. You might have something in your department. But this is what we found quite useful to use at a school I was working in last year. Oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead. Another technique which can be done really, really quickly, gives you a good idea of the class as a whole, is the 5-minute tick idea. So you check through a cross section of books, 5 or 6, to assess how students across a range of abilities performed in the previous lesson. So part of your planning, you grab the books, your students, your classes, the topic, what you're looking for. So you grab those students' books and you have a quick look through them. It might be that they've produced a piece of writing. So if they have, I'll begin the next class by showing an example from one student, or I might type up an example myself, putting in the mistakes or putting in the good stuff, and I photocopy that, and then we critique it together. So rather than me having to speak to every single student, which you can't do in one whole lesson, or writing lots and lots, the same thing in the book, we would critique it all together. And you can guide the class through the editing process, staying focused on common misconceptions and weaknesses, so that we model an improvement together. Individuals then return to their own work and edit independently with this example in mind. So you spend 5 minutes having a look through the books, preparing, maybe photocopying something or typing something up, and then there's your starter or midpoint for the mini plenary for the next lesson. Let's have a look at this. And they're kind of self-assessing really from what you've said. Live marking, there's huge potential at certain times in the scheme of learning. I am aware this doesn't always happen. And if I remember back to when I first started teaching, I probably didn't have the confidence to do this because I was thinking about my teaching. It was probably a little bit more teacher-led at the start of my career because I was getting to know the groups and I wanted to look at the learning. But if it's at the right stage, so as the students are working, you can call them up one by one to the desk, or the teacher travels around the room, obviously whatever is the state in your school with COVID and what the rules are on the individual school, and you can discuss their work and feedback both verbally with symbols. If you want evidence of this in the books, I know that some people use a verbal feedback stamp that can be useful. So they say, you know, it says verbal feedback given and they stamp it in the books. This technique works best if the class is undertaking an extended written piece of work, or if they're answering a long mark exam question. So I said earlier, like, it's very difficult to do in one lesson. So you may be able to see the whole class over 2 or 3 lessons. And you can differentiate the timing of the feedback, as some students need to be left to work independently for longer and others need to be steered on track much earlier. So you know those students that as soon as you set them a task, miss, and they ask you the question that you've literally just told them. But you know those students and you know to go to them first, and you know the students that actually need a little bit more time, they might need to process what's happening, and then you can go to them. The strategy can be manipulated in a variety of ways, depending on the subject and task. Really good if you maybe doing some coursework and you have planned for 3 lessons where they're just getting on with the work. It gives you the time to go round. It gives you feedback on how the task is going, how the learning's going. It could mean at the start of next lesson, you address those misconceptions as a whole class again, which we talked about earlier. This one does depend on the subject, it depends on the task and where you're going with that, but it can be a huge time saver getting it done during the lesson. And I'm sure you will have seen these, you might have department ones, you might have made your own. I've been in a school where it was a big drive, so we always used the same exit ticket, but exit tickets are also an assessment tool for teachers, and they're a great way to get everyone, to get whatever feedback you want from the lesson. So exit tickets can help inform your planning, feedback on the lesson and what worked well. Students, it allows some reflection time for the students if we can use them at the end of the lesson. What have they learned today? So they reflect as well as the teacher being reflective. It allows you to target misconceptions. It can be a fun activity depending on how you present it, and you get students involved in the learning process. It doesn't have to physically be a ticket, but it can be a very informative part of the plenary or end to the lesson. So I've got some examples of some exit tickets here. The focus is on enjoyment and learning. Questions they have then come back to these at the start. So you might have 4 different shapes. You decide what goes in the cloud. What did you learn today? In the square, you might write, what are you going to use this for? You might be using it towards coursework. You might even ask, which part of the lesson did you enjoy today? So it doesn't have to be content driven all the time. It can be skills as well. You could link it to social media. I could probably be a bit more IT savvy, and I'm sure there's something on there where you could do an exit ticket where they're able to use their iPad to give you this information, but midway through the lesson, so you don't have to use exit tickets at the end. They could tweet, they have to write a tweet to summarize the learning so far. I've seen you can get different shaped post-its, but anyone tried cutting a post-it into a bird to make it some kind of tweet? Could be a good idea. They can allow challenge, differentiate, and again, it should hopefully up the engagement. Social media is what they're all into. So I said earlier that I was at a school where there was a big focus on us all using the same. This hasn't come out very well looking at it, but you get the idea. It wasn't necessarily all about the content. This was about attitude to learning. So to achieve my personal target today, I need to. So they might have been told last lesson they were a little bit too chatty. So they've got to write in the box that I need to focus on my written work today, rather than getting involved in all the class discussions. So this was just an example, and it was consistent. Everybody in the school used them, so the students were really used to them. And yeah, they were just a sheet of paper. It was given out at the end or at the start of the lesson, because if you can see there's a start point, a midpoint, and an end point. and the students could be used throughout the lesson. This is also a really good example of an exit ticket, not just at the exit. So starter, look at last lesson's work. So this is on the desk the whole time while the students are doing the lesson. We've got a mini plenary in there. And then what have you learnt today? So it's exit tickets allow you the flexibility for what you want on there. And there's pathways. The school I was at, that they're the different colours too. The students knew what colours they were focusing on, or they could challenge themselves to a higher pathway if they wanted to. And exit ticket doesn't have to physically be a ticket. So I've used this before, just stuck it on the board, love a post-it me. So they all had lots of post-its and they could ask a question about anything in the lesson and stick it on. What did they like specifically about the lesson, about aha moment? So when did it start to click? And things to change. If you've got a good relationship with that class, if they're not going to write something silly like change your hair, you can get on there, didn't like the way this was, you know, you can get some really good feedback for you of how the lesson went. And if you've got that relationship with the class, it can be really helpful. As you know, as a reflective practitioner, we're always trying to improve. So it can be as simple as this, and you can draw this on the board. You know, it takes minimal preparation. And then at the end of the lesson, you've got all the post-its. I've stuck this in my folder. When I'm planning the next lesson, the questions are used as my starter. So someone might have asked a question about something that I wasn't explicit enough in the lesson. I use that as my starter for next time. So there's some of the things I wanted to share. I'm sure there's bits that you've seen. So it'd be really nice if you were happy to add to the chat anything that you might use from what we've looked at today, or anything you've seen. I didn't discuss the printers. I know lots of teachers are now getting the labels where you can talk into something and then it prints out a label. I didn't share this today because I've never used it. I have heard that they are very, very good and cut your marking in half. But I understand they have to have a monthly subscription. So I don't know if your department would do that and you'd have one in department, but then you'd have to share it. So is there anything in the chats? It'd be really, really nice if there's anything anyone's going to take away today and try and use this week in their teaching, or anything they would like to share that I haven't shared today. Oh, I use pluckers all the time for a fast assessment. I've never heard of pluckers. Please expand. The whole class feedback, yeah, it really helped. I used it when I was teaching English and science. They were just making the misconceptions. It was always the same. The spellings of the more difficult parts of the digestive system were always the spellings that they needed. Check that your school hasn't got a whole class feedback sheet that you can use or adapt. Yes, so with the exit cards, especially with the younger year groups, I totally agree. You might have to give examples of what you're looking for and use more constructive use, yeah, for the planning. So maybe if you can use Berger's kind, specific and helpful as a framework to use with the exit tickets, maybe the two together could work quite nicely, I think. But yeah, you've got to know your classes and you know what classes need more support with these kind of things. So I think we'll leave it there. Hopefully you'll take something useful away from today to have a go. As I said, they're just what I've seen, what I've used, and have found that it means that you're constantly getting assessment and feedback from your classes. It's not marking just for the sake of marking. It's marking to help you with your future planning, but also giving that feedback to the students for them to learn and go forward. So thank you very much for tuning in and have a good evening.